Hello everyone, Coach Fury here, and today I'm here with my first video cast for the CSL League. I was asked by the league to provide a video cast on a regular basis, talking about different topics of interest that are happening in this league. For those of you who are interested, you can simply Google it online to find the league and sign up. It's an online multiplayer league for Draft Day Sports Pro Basketball 3, I believe. And it's just going to be doing some general news and some analysis of some topics that are happening in this league at the moment. So we're going to kick off with a couple of different trades that have happened recently, and we'll just talk through that, and I'll give my thoughts on to whether I think teams had got the upper hand in the deal or whether I think it's a fair deal, and then we'll sort of move on to talk about a couple of teams of interest in the league at the moment, in terms of not necessarily being a contender, but in terms of what they're doing and what their plans are, and what we can kind of expect from them over the coming season and next few seasons, and any difficult decisions that they may have to face. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kick off with a couple of trades that have happened in the league. First one is going to be this 3-team deal involving the Miami Heat, the Memphis Grizzlies and the Dallas Mavericks. So it was looks like it was a fairly straightforward deal in terms of personnel. I don't think it was any real major players moving hands in this, but I'll sort of just give you a bit of an overview of the my viewpoints of the teams really. So if we start with we'll start with Miami up at the top here. So for me, I think they've obviously have looked to acquire more draft picks, and they are going to be the team that we're going to talk about in the spotlight a little bit later on. But for me, I think it's interesting that they weren't too high on Bogdanovic. So I was a little bit surprised by the move really for them, because this Miami team's a bit deprived of talent at the moment, but Bogdanovic is probably one of their sort of shining spotlights really that they've got so far. He's 27 years old. He was quite a high pick originally, and his career in the CSL has been fairly positive. I mean, we can look at these numbers down the bottom here. He's obviously having a bit of a down year. He's not playing too many minutes, to be honest with you, either. So that may be one of the factors, but it's interesting that he's sort of jumped ship really and been moved on. So he didn't last necessarily a season. He only played 25 games for Miami, and interesting that they've sort of decided to cash him in for what's essentially a bunch of sort of middle tier players and some second round picks really. Obviously they feel that they're not going to get the value from Bogdanovic with that $6.5 million contract, so they're trying to move him on. But from my opinion, we'll talk about Miami a little bit later in a little more depth, but I was surprised by this move by them because, like I said, they're deprived of talent. They've got a couple of rookies in here. JP Koto was a rookie, I believe, and I think some of these guys may have been as well. But it's interesting to see that they've made the move to get rid of Bogdanovic. I was surprised by that, to be honest. So sort of moving on to Memphis. For me, I really like this deal for Memphis. I think obviously they've given away the second round picks. To be honest, the value of second round picks is a bit hit and miss. It depends on how well you do your scouting. The way CSL operates is it's media activity for scouting points, which GMs can use it to look at different players and different ratings. So for me, I really like this deal for Memphis in particular. So for those of you who are not aware of the CSL, Memphis have been having a really good season so far. We just need to find them on here. Where are they? So they're currently second in their division with a 15-8 record, and they've been playing with some really, really good basketball. For me, I really like this move for them because they picked up Bogdanovic, who is certainly going to be a nice rotation piece for them. They obviously will lose, the likes of Shane Larkin, who's been backing up at point guard. But I actually feel that Bogdanovic is probably going to be an upgrade over Larkin in terms of matchups, in terms of his ability and range. I think that they're going to get good value out of Bogdanovic. Personally, as well, I also liked it for Memphis because they pick up Tyler Zeller. So you're probably wondering, coach for you, why on earth are you talking about Tyler Zeller? He's a guy who's probably never going to really get solid minutes for them. He's just going to sit in their bench and not do a great deal. I'm not even sure. He may have actually been cut, so that's interesting. He may have been cut straight away. But I liked it just for the fact that it was the Zeller brothers were sort of being put in reunion. So Cody Zeller is already in Memphis and is one of their key players for them. So I was happy to see that he may get to play with his brother. So I like that move as well. But for me, I think this bringing Bogdanovic in as an upgrade over the likes of Larkin. So I think that was a good move for them in terms of their prospects going into what will probably be a playoff run for them and trying to compete with some of the better teams in the league. For Dallas, I mean, it was I like the move for them. I think that the likes of Zeller, Herntner Gomez and Scott are just bench players. They weren't getting any time in Dallas at all. And the likes of Larkin is going to be a big upgrade for them at the backup point guard position. Interestingly, that he's moved within division, so Memphis obviously feeling that they can sort of make that sort of acquisition without that. So it looks like Tyler is still on Dallas for some reason, unless this trade hasn't been confirmed yet. So it probably hasn't been confirmed. That's probably why. So hopefully they don't cut Zeller. That'd be nice. So yeah, I mean, in terms of Larkin, I mean he's not a great shooter, but he's got fairly good handles, I believe. If we look at his stats here, so his pass and handling's fairly solid. He's a pretty above average defender, and he's got some good IQ. So he'll be able to fill in some solid minutes for Dallas, and which will certainly help them in that position there. I believe that they've currently got, in terms of their backup point guard, they've got Ish Smith, who is not really playing a great deal for them. Yeah, some minimal minutes. He's sort of backing up the likes of I believe it's Curry and co. So that's a good move for them, I think, as well. So that was the first trade that we were going to look at. The next one was this New York Knicks Wolves deal. So this is probably one of the smaller deals that probably would go unnoticed in the league if it weren't for this video, to be honest. So obviously New York Knicks have had a new general manager come in, Stockton, who's made some big moves, I'd say, to begin with, some bold moves. He's for those of you who are not aware, he made a couple of moves to move Kevin Love on from the New York Knicks, and he's essentially, his plan at the moment, I believe, is just looking to clear cap space for the off season to try and build this franchise into the image that he actually wants. So for me, this deal makes absolute sense in terms of that plan for him. So he's moved Spencer Hawes, who I think he was playing some solid minutes for them, but he's moved them for what I believe for Washburn, who, in my opinion, whilst he's going to be a late pickup, he was a rookie who was undrafted and then signed, but he had a really good start to his career in Minnesota. So in terms of what he's going to bring to New York, I thought it'd be interesting to just talk about that for a minute. If I can actually find New York on here. There they are. So we'll flick through to New York, who have had a good record so far. They started fairly positively. Like I said, Stockton's made a couple of big moves recently, and I think he's not done yet. But in my opinion, picking up Washburn was a really good acquisition. I think even if he only stays there for the year and then he gets a contract elsewhere, I think it would be a good move for both Washburn and New York, in the sense that Washburn is going to get some solid minutes in New York now. I think, for those of you who don't know, Stockton was the assistant general manager at Minnesota before he moved to New York. So he knows all about Washburn. I think he was one of the driving forces behind Minnesota actually signing him in the first place. And he put up some fairly solid numbers. I mean, bear in mind he's a rookie. He's shooting 41%, 37 from three-point range. And he was doing a little bit of everything. I mean, we know about his ability, for those of you who follow the CSL. He's not going to be the world's greatest defender. He's not going to set the world alight, but he's going to put up some really solid numbers. And I think if he starts for them, or gets a 6-man sort of level minutes, 25 minutes, then we could be looking at a potential candidate for an outside shot for Rookie of the Year. That's why I like that move for them. For Minnesota, on the other hand, the deal kind of makes sense. I think Spencer Hawes is a expiring player, so it makes sense in that they've got Love and Monroe, who they just brought in. Probably not the greatest of defenders in the post. Hawes will hopefully shore that out for them. The Wolves don't have their pick, so in terms of moves it makes sense. They're just trying to acquire any sort of level of talent really to compete now, because they have no other option. So completely makes sense. It'd be interesting to see how many minutes Hawes gets, to whether he actually is effective or not. But I don't think that the likes of Black and Washburn we're going to see minutes in Minnesota going forward anyway. So completely makes sense. I liked it for both teams. Simple move, but moves that actually you can see why the general managers made them. So we'll move on to the final transaction that's happened recently, which is another 3-way deal involving Houston, Milwaukee and Atlanta. So in my opinion for this one, it's another one of these sort of minor deals really that turned into a multi-team deal just for fit, I think, more than for really acquiring upgrades and moves. So if we talk about Houston first, so Houston are an interesting sort of topic in their own right really this year. So a lot of people have been sort of talking about them in terms of underperforming, in terms of still ruining a couple of trades that they've made in the past. They're currently sitting with a 13 and 15 record. They have a franchise player in James Harden. Questions around fit and build and correct balance of team has been the question that's been surrounding them for the whole season so far, for the start. Can the likes of Zach LaVine and Harden play well together? Is Isaiah Thomas the right fit at point guard for them? And this doesn't quite necessarily fill anything for them. For me, it's one of these moves that it's a move for the sake of a move, if I'm honest. I think they've obviously got Bismack Biyombo, who's their sort of starting centre, of Vonleh, who's their starting centre, as well as Brandon Wright. They've already got the post presence that they probably need, and they want to try and develop. For me, I feel this is kind of a bit of a panic move for them. Eric Moreland is well known as a really good shot blocker. For those of you who don't follow CSL, he's just a post shot blocker. He's not really anything else. So the only thing that this deal screams to me in terms of Houston is that they're making this move because they're trying to line up a move to get rid of another one of their post players they've got. And for me, I think it's Noah Vonleh who's going to be the one who's going to be moving on. I think he's been shopped heavily by Houston, and this is kind of a bit of a initial move just to ensure that moving Vonleh wherever he goes won't be as big an impact as would be anticipated if they did move him in any other deals. So I'll just show you sort of we'll just flick through and show you more now. So you can see here he's a shot blocker, 74 rating there. I think he's fairly solid. I think he's playing some solid minutes for Atlanta. We'll get his minutes up in a minute, but he's not, for me, he's not one of these players who, for Houston, they need to be going after. He's not the one that they need to get them from what is currently, I hate to say it, but probably not a playoff team, to a team that should be in the playoffs comfortably with the likes of James Harden and co. So yeah, we can see here he's not been playing heavy minutes. His field goal has been okay, not great for a centre, but he gets blocks. That is his game, and he's on a cheap contract. So for value for money, he makes sense, but for fit and for what Houston needs, doesn't make sense in my opinion. So moving on to Milwaukee. So Milwaukee are one of the teams that are sort of going through this huge rebuilding period at the moment, and they've been doing fairly well for that at the moment, I would say, in terms of thinking about how they've been developing. They've been in a tough situation. They've only won 4 games. Doesn't necessarily tell all the story, but they've for me, I think they've made this move for a couple of reasons. They've sort of looked at fit and looked at a bit of a try before you buy, I think. So Dalian, I don't even know how to pronounce that last name, so I'm not even going to try, but he's a minimum player. He's a younger player, I believe. He's still got a fairly good length of his career left to play. If we flick through to where he is, I believe he might still be in Houston on this again. I don't think this trade's been necessarily been confirmed yet, but it's probably a bit of a try before you buy. Like I said, I think they're looking at it and thinking, well, we can bring him in, give him some minutes, in a position where they've had a couple of injuries, and have a look and see whether he is the right fit for them going forward, because they'll have cap room. They can sign him up if they need to. We'll take a little look at him now. So he's not been playing too many minutes. He's a rookie who came in the second round this year. Probably had some scouting on him, probably thinking about, well, we'll give him a go. We'll give him some minutes. We'll have a look at him, like I said. So for Milwaukee, no-brainer. I think they gave away, I can't remember who it was now, I'll have a look now. So so they gave away Vasquez, player they probably don't necessarily need for fit-wise. So that makes perfect sense. Minor move for them, really. Looking at Atlanta, again, they've given away what is Moorlander, who is a shot blocker, acquired a couple of, I want to say garbage players, but they are Galloway and Vasquez. They're not going to set the world alight in CSL. And I think the key thing for them is they've brought in this second round pick. So essentially what they've done is they've moved Moreland's contract, and they're gambling on the fact that New York will effectively sort of drop down the rankings. They're currently 15 and 13, like I said, and hopefully that will give them the push that they need in terms of acquiring from that second round pick, actually bringing in a better player than Moreland on a cheaper contract. So I think they're sort of taking a bit of a gamble there, and might as well. Moreland's not going to be a be all end all for them, and if they don't necessarily get the player they want in the second round, they can always look to move them on again for a second round pick next season anyway. So that makes sense to me. So that's sort of the trades that have been happening over the past couple of days or so. There's obviously rumours of some other bigger trades happening over the next few days, week or so, I think. So when they sort of come out, if we look to run another video cast, we'll obviously comment on them in more detail. But I expect a lot of that to be picked up in the CSL podcast anyway. So this is just trying to cover some of the other things that may be happening that won't see some airtime in other forms of media on the league. So that's the trades over with. What I wanted to talk about now was a couple of teams of interest, and where they're sort of going, really. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Miami Heat. So we'll load up their page, and we'll talk on sort of what they've been doing, what their plans have been, what we kind of see their future looking like. So we'll let this load, and then we'll sort of have some comments on there. So obviously they've been involved with we've won the trades recently that we talked about, and we commented that they were looking to pick up essentially a load of second round picks again, and hopefully when this page loads up, this HTML loads up, you'll sort of see the reason why they're taking that route rather than necessarily some other routes that some of the other teams may be looking at. So we'll load them up. So you can see here they're currently 9-19, and we sort of commented that they've moved Bogdanovic recently for some second round picks, but hopefully this page explains a little bit in terms of what their plan is, and we'll hopefully talk about a little bit about what we think their insight's going to be going forward. So for those of you who don't follow the CSL, or this is the first episode you're sort of looking at and you're completely fresh to the league, the next draft that's coming up has been sort of touted as one of the better drafts in terms of top talent. So what do I mean by that? I mean, basically the top 4 to 5 picks look like they're going to be really, really good players. So For those of you who don't know, the projected number one prospect is going to be Ben Simmons, who, for those of you who follow the NBA, is currently having some fun with some injuries. And the CSL version of Ben Simmons apparently is going to be a very, very good player. So a lot of teams have essentially decided that they're not going to win, not going to compete now, and they're going to throw all their chips into their hat for the upcoming draft. And Miami is one of the teams that fit that bill perfectly. So they started the season. They started the season fairly well. They had the likes of Greg Monroe and some other personnel I can't remember off the top of my head, but they had a fairly good team. They were going to be a middle lottery playoff team probably, and they kind of decided from day one of the season, after the draftees got announced, that they were going to look at make some drastic moves to their roster, and the outcome has been basically what we see below. So you can see here they've got 4 first round picks this year, a couple of seconds. They're obviously going to pick up even more seconds in that trade once it's actually been confirmed. They've got 2 first round picks the following year and 2 first round picks the year after. And the interesting thing with this is that they're first round picks that probably will end up being fairly good first round picks. So the Knicks obviously going through a bit of a period where they're sort of making some drastic changes. So that pick could be absolutely anywhere. The Bucks, we've sort of noted, have only won 4 games this year, probably going to be a top 3 pick in the lottery. The Heat, obviously 9-19, they're probably going to be a lottery pick. The Nuggets will probably be a lottery pick as well. So we're looking at 3, possibly 4 lottery picks there in the hat to try and get Ben Simmons. So fairly obvious what the Miami are doing here. The following year, they've obviously got the Knicks pick as well. Who knows how that will go, depending on free agency. That could be anywhere from a lottery pick to a playoff 20 plus pick. And then after that they've got the Timberwolves picks, who Timberwolves are going for a massive rebuilding sort of phase. I say rebuilding, they don't own any of their picks, but they're sort of lack of talent at the moment, hence why they've got Love and Monroe, and so that again could be anywhere, but we'll focus on these ones. So it looks like they're going to get 3 lottery prospects in the upcoming draft. So where does that leave this roster? Well, I think this roster will probably change dramatically between now and that draft coming up, and this could be one of these where it's a bit like Indiana. So for those of you who don't necessarily follow the CSL, Indiana are one of the teams who have gone through to quote the Philadelphia NBA team, 76ers, they've gone through the process and basically, don't want to say tanked, but effectively had a lack of quality on their roster for many, many years, building up high draft pick after high draft pick, and they're now just starting to reap the benefits in terms of they have the likes of Karl Anthony Towns, Paul DeGeorge as well. I think that's the way to say his name. We'll just check that now. And they're now 19-8. So they're actually competing with some of the best teams in the East, and probably look like one of the favourites to go potentially to the Eastern Conference Finals if they keep up this level of play. So they're looking really strong. Georgia DePaula, that's his name. So they've got some real elite talent on this team now, and for me, I think that's exactly where Miami's going. None of this team's going to probably stay there. They're going to try and move as much of it as possible. In terms of personnel, I think that we could see a whole new team next year if the Miami GM has his way. But in terms of the future, they're obviously looking at the draft, thinking that if they can get a couple of good quality talents in this draft and the next 2 drafts, they'll have a huge influx of ability, and will then probably look at one of the stronger teams in the East, just as the likes of Indiana probably coming into a bit of a powerhouse. Detroit will probably still be up there, but in terms of some of the other Eastern powers, we could see a bit of a change in a couple of years. That's what they're hoping on anyway. So it'll be interesting to watch Miami over for the rest of the season really, because they've somehow managed to make a couple of deals where they've managed to acquire first round picks, in not necessarily giving away the whole house, bit by bit, giving away small pieces for first round picks, and then these picks seem to be turning into sort of better potential numbers in terms of where they're going to sit in the draft. So they've been quite clever in how they've approached this, and some people won't like that approach. They will think that every team should try and compete no matter what, but it looks like the Miami Heat general manager has chosen this approach and he's sticking to it. And the key thing will be about whether he manages to stay with it or whether he gets frustrated and then decides starts making some dramatic moves. Because we've seen that in the past with teams where they've acquired all these draft picks and then decided, I've had enough of losing, and then just basically thrown them all away for middle range players, and then they're back in where they started and wondering why they're there. So interested to see how Miami do. We'll keep an eye on them, we'll see that throughout the season, but an interesting way to approach a team build, certainly in the CSL. So the other team that I wanted to talk about today is probably one where some of the people watching this will probably sigh and go, not them again. They seem to always be mentioned. Doesn't matter whether they're performing badly, performing well, they're always mentioned. But for me, interesting that, because when I was approached to do this video cast, one of the things that they mentioned to me was, well, this is one of the teams that you might want to have a look at because of some rumours they've been hearing about the approach they're taking and what they're actually thinking about. So for those of you who just may have seen me click whilst this is loading up, it's the New Orleans Pelicans. So the New Orleans Pelicans have had a really strong CSL history. I think they've won a championship, I believe, and they've always been a strong contender in the conference. So the reason that I want to talk about the Pelicans today was that there's some rumours that they're actually considering just a full-blown rebuild. So they've got some really, really good personnel in the likes of Anthony Davis. He's probably the CSL's best player. He's an exceptional player, can play pretty much anywhere in the 3-4-5 if you let him. Puts up incredible numbers, and he's been the building block for this team for so long, since he entered the league. In terms of the other personnel, they made a minor move a couple of weeks ago, taking on Nicholas Batum from the Utah Jazz for Chandler Parsons. For those of you who have caught the CSL podcast, I think it was mentioned in there, but a bit of a strange move. Parsons is a bit more of a better player in my opinion, a bit more balanced. Batum's just purely a defensive player, so a bit of a drastic change for them. In terms of their other personnel, they've got Joe Jackson and the Trevion Graham, who's probably, in my opinion, one of the favourites for Rookie of the Year, and they're putting up some solid numbers. They're obviously within a good age range, so I think the approach that I think New Orleans is probably thinking about at the moment is do we just get rid of the likes of, I know Batum's just been signed, so he probably can't move straight away, but do we move the likes of Dwight Howard, Trevor Ariza, Chris Bosh, some of these older names, and just accept the fact that we're now going for a bit of a mini retooling, rebuilding period with the likes of Joe Jackson, Trevion Graham and Anthony Davis, and accept that that's going to be our next window. We need to build for that. I'm not too sure about what moves they've been looking at in terms of who they've been looking to acquire, who they've been looking to move whilst this page loads up, but I think it'll be an interesting one. So obviously Anthony Davis is still 26 years old, so he's probably got another 7 years comfortably in terms of how DDS works in being a real elite centre. The interesting thing is they obviously must feel that the likes of Trevion Graham and Joe Jackson are good enough for them to comfortably take that move and actually consider moving the likes of Dwight Howard and co. So it'd be interesting to see how they approach it over the next few weeks. Do they heavily shop the likes of Howard, who, to be honest, he's 33 years old, he's on a $22 million contract. I question how much trade value they're going to get out of him. I think the better value that they would necessarily get would be the likes of moving Trevor Ariza, possibly Chris Bosh. I say Chris Bosh, but probably just for the name. In terms of value, I'm not talking about Chris Bosh as the player now, but someone in the league will be a Chris Bosh fan and will actually be interested in taking him on. I think The one that they'll look to move first will be Ariza to acquire some talent. He's a fairly solid player in terms of how the CSL operates. I wonder whether they'll actually get any good value for Dwight Howard if they look to move him. I'm not sure what the length of his contract is. We'll just load that up now and have a look. But then you've obviously got the likes of Batum, who you've just acquired. You've just made that move to bring in an old veteran, really. So this would be a complete drastic change. So in my opinion, I think when I was approached about New Orleans, and there was sort of this thing of, well, they're looking at rebuilding, is that, perhaps you want to talk on that. I don't necessarily think they're going to be rebuilding anytime soon. I think it's going to be a retool in terms of moving Howard and Batum and Ariza to try and acquire some picks in the coming draft, or some additional youth, some more specialist players. So yeah, you can see Howard's got 3 years left on that deal, so he's going to be 36 when he comes off of that. Not many teams in the league will want to take on that contract. He's still putting up some solid numbers, but you can kind of see here that it's a drop off, a bit of a drop off from last season. I mean, he's got more blocks, less steals. I want to say he's grabbing similar ball numbers, but his points and his field goal percentage are down. So teams looking at that when will be thinking, do I want to acquire an aging veteran on a huge salary? Probably the answer is no. So it'll be interesting to see how New Orleans go, whether they do sort of make this change. They can also quite easily, I feel, in my opinion, they're probably a move or two away from going from a 15-11 team to, to being from what would probably be a 3rd or 4th seed, I think, at best, to probably a 2nd seed with a couple of minor moves. I mean, Joe Jackson and Trevian Graham are youngsters in the backcourt. If they acquire a bit more experience there, that might help. Possibly some strategy moves in terms of pushing Howard out of the rotation into a sort of 6-man role, acquiring at 4 and 5, moving someone like Ariza back into the rotation, putting Batum at the 4. That might give him a bit more flexibility and give Anthony Davis more shots, which would probably help in terms of wins. So I'd be interested to see how that does. So hopefully that's giving you a slight overview in terms of a couple of teams in the spotlight. We'll probably cover a couple of teams each time, depending on detail. We might cover a couple of big trades, but the idea is that this is going to sort of complement, I think, the podcast that comes out on a sort of regular basis as well. So before I sort of finish up here, I'm just going to go back to the league standings, and we'll just do a quick scan through there, and I'll comment if there's teams that I feel sort of underperforming, overperforming, because I know that was kind of covered in the podcast. We won't cover the same teams. We'll cover some different teams. Just quick couple of minutes, and then we'll finish off this video cast. That's if my internet page decides to load back to the standings. There we go. So we'll scroll down and we'll just have a quick look. So I think for me the interesting one is that the Philadelphia 76ers, I think it's the first one that stands out for me in the Atlantic Division. They're not really talked about a great deal. 10 and 18 for me seems a little bit low. I feel that maybe I'm just guessing here, but from what I remember looking around the league, I feel that their roster is in a better shape than what they've actually got here. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, so they've got Jabari Parker, who's a really, really good player in this league. I think Payne is as well. So they've got some good personnel. I feel that they should be doing a little bit better than 10 and 18. Just off the bat, perhaps they haven't got the right rotation, the right strategy in place for that. But first one I can see off the bat. So looking here, I mean, Central Division I'm not going to talk about a great deal because that's pretty much how I would expect it to be looking at the rosters. Possibly Detroit, higher than Indiana. Indiana's second up. Bulls are probably surprising that they're still one of the top teams there. They've made some big moves, but they've brought in some really good personnel, so kind of expect that to be as is. Southeast Division is interesting in that Orlando should be walking away with this quite comfortably in terms of their team. They've got DeMarcus Cousins and Paul George, who are really, really good players in the CSL. Again, I think it's probably a balance issue that they're struggling with. We'll load up their roster and have a quick look. If it decides to load up. Okay, there we go. So yes, they've got Rondo, who's still a good defensive point guard. Not a great shooter, I think, but still solid. Yeah, I think for me it's probably again strategy and balance. I think, yeah, I mean, for me, I expect them to be walking away with that Southeast Division. So interesting that the Heat aren't the lowest in the conference yet. I expect that to drop down with the moves that they've been making. So moving on to Southwest, I mean, that's kind of as I would expect it. I think the surprising one so far is that the San Antonio Spurs are above the Pelicans, but for those of you who follow CSL, again, they've made some drastic moves in bringing in some more ready now players with a couple of moves of Chicago and co. So nothing really surprising there. I mean, Houston should be doing better. This is probably should be one of the most competitive divisions, and it kind of isn't at the moment. It seems like Dallas and Memphis are kind of walking away from this one at the moment. Moving on to Northwest, I mean, that's kind of as is. Probably the Nuggets you'd expect to be above Minnesota, but Minnesota have kind of made some moves to actually kind of improve their competitiveness, so kind of how you'd expect it as is. And then finally, I mean, Phoenix Suns, everyone's talked about them in this league, but they're really flying away with it, and so are the Kings. I mean, they're the two elite teams in this division, and then it's a bit of a mix of just bottom feeders at the moment. I mean, Warriors have got some talent. Lakers are just completely going in for tank for Simmons. I think they need some talent, and then the Clippers again, lack of talent as well in their roster at the moment. So I think we'll leave it there, guys. As I said, this is probably going to be a regular video cast, talking about some trades, talking about some topics of interest, a couple of teams in some spotlights. But if there's anything of interest that you would want to see in the video cast going forward, then just comment below and hit the subscribe button to follow them as I load them up and as they go live.